Before I share this story, take a moment, drop a comment, and let me know where you're watching from. I mean it, it's always moving to see how far a story like this can reach, how many hearts it can touch. If you're someone who cares about real, honest stories of faith, hope, and moments that stay with you, tap the like button. It helps more than you know. Now, let me tell you what happened. It was 8:15 a.m., May 11th, 2025, a crisp Roman morning just 3 days after the white smoke curled from the Sistine Chapel, proclaiming the election of Pope Leo XIV. Inside the Apostolic Palace, the Vatican pulsed with the unease of transition. Staff moved like shadows, whispering about the new pontiff's quiet demeanor. Security schedules were half-written, and cardinals glided through the halls, their red robes trailing like echoes of a world still adjusting to change. But Pope Leo XIV, once Father Robert Provost, carried no trace of pomp. He walked the marble corridors with the same weathered steps he'd taken on Peru's mountain trails, slow, deliberate, his eyes catching the flicker of human souls rather than the gleam of gold frescoes. That morning, after his private prayers in a dimly lit chapel, where the scent of incense lingered like a prayer itself, Leo passed the Swiss guard post in the eastern corridor. The guards stood as they had for centuries, their striped uniforms vivid against the stone, their posture carved from discipline and devotion. They were the Vatican's silent protectors, trained to be as unyielding as the walls around them, except for one man, Corporal Elias Meyer. Elias was no ordinary guard. Known for his precision, hands steady as stone, fluent in 4 languages, never a crease in his uniform, he was a beacon of reliability. But that morning, he was a man unraveling. His jaw clenched so tightly it seemed it might crack, his knuckles blanched white around his halberd, and his blue eyes, usually sharp, shimmered with a grief so raw it seemed to spill into the air. Pope Leo noticed instantly. His heart, shaped by years of consoling the broken, skipped a beat. He didn't call for an aid or pause for protocol. Ignoring the stunned glances of 2 officials, whose murmurs froze mid-sentence, Leo walked straight to Elias, his white cassock whispering against the marble. Raising a hand to hush their objections, he stepped closer, closer than any pope had ever stood to a guard, and in a voice thick with compassion, like a father speaking to a wounded son, he said, "My son, what burdens your heart?" Elias's breath caught, his body jolting as if struck, not by authority, but by kindness he hadn't braced for. He tried to hold his ground, to be the soldier he'd trained to be. "Nothing, Your Holiness," he choked out, but his voice splintered, a fragile dam breaking. Tears welled, unbidden, and he swallowed hard, his trembling hands betraying him. "My daughter, she's missing," he whispered, the words tearing from his throat like a confession. "Taken from her home in the night. I fear for her life." The corridor fell into a sacred silence, broken only by the soft clink of Elias's armor as his stance wavered. His chest heaved with ragged breaths he'd held since finding Sophia's bed empty, her lavender butterfly hair clip glinting on her pillow like a cruel farewell. Pope Leo stepped closer still, defying centuries of distance between Pope and guard, and placed a hand on Elias's shoulder, leather and linen meeting steel, warmth meeting cold. Then, a spark of memory flickered in Leo's eyes, his face softening with recognition. "Peru," he murmured, his voice a bridge across 15 years. "Chiclayo, 2010. The collapsed school. You handed me a shovel." Elias's eyes widened, his soldier's mask shattering. How could this pope, 3 days into his reign, know his name, his past, with such intimacy? "You were there," Leo said, his gaze steady. "Digging in the dust beside me." Elias nodded, his throat tight, as if a long-sealed wound had been touched. "I was a volunteer then," he rasped, his voice barely above a whisper. "After my wife passed, I didn't know where else to go. She died giving birth to Sophia, the daughter who's now gone." The words hung heavy. A father's heart laid bare. Leo's hand tightened gently on Elias's shoulder, his silence a vessel for the guard's pain. Tears traced Elias's cheeks, unheeded, as he stood vulnerable before the successor of Peter. Then Leo spoke, his voice a vow. "She gave you life while giving life. And we will not let that life be taken." In that moment, there were no titles. No Vatican hierarchy, just two fathers, one broken by loss, one anchored by memory, bound by a shared scar from a distant disaster. Under the golden frescoes, protocol dissolved. Pope Leo XIV did not walk away. He stood beside a man crumbling inside his armor and chose to act. To grasp the depth of this moment, we must return to January 13th, 2010, in Chiclayo, Peru. At 9:41 p.m., a 6.6 magnitude earthquake ripped through the region, the earth convulsing like a wounded beast. Hospital walls split, clay brick homes crumbled into dust, and schools vanished under heaps of twisted concrete. Screams shattered the night, then faded into a haunting silence, broken only by the frantic scrape of hands clawing through rubble. Among the first to respond was Father Robert Provost, not yet a bishop, not yet Pope Leo XIV, just a missionary with calloused hands, a torn cassock streaked with mud, and a headlamp casting a feeble glow into the darkness. He wasn't meant to be there. His assignment had ended 2 weeks earlier, but he'd stayed to bury a catechist's mother, her frail body laid to rest in a village graveyard. That promise, that delay, would prove divine, saving lives he couldn't yet count. By midnight, Chiclayo's central plaza had become a chaotic rescue hub. Locals staggered in, barefoot, their faces hollow with shock, clutching blankets and shards of their shattered homes. The air was thick with dust and despair, the scent of earth and blood mingling. Volunteers arrived from Brazil, Bolivia, Switzerland, their eyes burning with urgency. Among them was Elias Meyer, a 23-year-old Swiss man in a dust-covered Red Cross vest, a bloodied bandage wrapped around his forearm, his face gaunt from sleepless nights and unspoken sorrow. He spoke halting Spanish, but his hands moved with purpose, as if digging could silence the ache in his soul. Father Robert and Elias found themselves side by side, tearing through the debris of a collapsed school. "3 children are under this wall," Robert whispered, his voice raw, his throat coated with dust. "I heard one cry." Elias nodded, his jaw set, and seized a crowbar, dropping to his knees. They worked in near silence, their breaths ragged, their hands torn by jagged stone. The hours blurred, their knees bloodied, their lungs burning. By 3:22 a.m., they'd clawed through a meter of rubble. Then a faint whimper, a child's voice, fragile as a thread. Elias leaned in, his Swiss accent thick with desperation, shouting, "Don't sleep!" "Hold on!" Together, they freed a girl, her arm fractured, her eyes wide with terror. Then a second child, then a third, unconscious but breathing, his pulse faint under Robert's trembling fingers. 3 lives pulled from the jaws of death by 2 strangers united by a single purpose. Exhausted but unbroken, they didn't collapse. They knelt in the shattered plaza, their voices weaving Psalm 23 in 2 languages, Robert's Spanish steady, Elias's German faltering with emotion. "Even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for you are with me." For 12 days, they labored together, clearing rubble, distributing food, carrying the dead, holding mothers who wailed for lost children. The work was relentless, their bodies pushed beyond limits, but their spirits held fast. One evening, beside a fire built from broken furniture, the flames casting shadows on their weary faces, Elias broke his silence. "My wife, Clara, died in Geneva," he said, his voice low, his eyes fixed on the embers. "She was 22, giving birth to our daughter. I came here to outrun the pain, but every night I hold the dying, and it's her face I see." His voice cracked, a sob stifled in his throat. Robert placed a hand on his shoulder, the warmth of his touch cutting through the chill. "You're not outrunning," he said softly. "You're walking through it, and that's where God walks too." That night, Elias wept, not a loud breaking, but a quiet release, tears streaming like a river held back too long. Robert didn't offer sermons or scripture. He sat beside him, the fire crackling, until the crying stopped, their shared silence a sacrament of its own. On January 26th, the rescue tents folded, and the volunteers were called home. Before parting, Robert pressed a small wooden cross into Elias's palm, carved from the altar of a collapsed chapel, its edges smoothed by prayer. "For when faith feels lost," he said, his voice steady but warm, "remember, salvation sometimes looks like two men in dust, lifting stone." They didn't speak goodbyes, only exchanged a nod, their eyes holding a bond forged in crisis. They never saw each other again until May 11th, 2025, when one wore the white cassock of Pope Leo XIV, and the other stood trembling, a Swiss guard praying for a miracle to save his daughter, Sophia. When Elias's confession fell silent in the Vatican corridor, Pope Leo's response was immediate, visceral. He didn't summon the Secretary of State or defer to Vatican protocol. He looked into the eyes of his friend, a man he'd once knelt beside in ruin, and said, "We'll find her, whatever it takes. The world may forget what fathers carry, but I don't." His voice was a vow, his eyes burning with the same resolve that had driven him through Peru's rubble. Less than an hour later, at 9:27 a.m., Leo canceled every appointment on his schedule. A diplomatic greeting with Chile's ambassador was postponed. An economic review with the Secretariat for the Economy was shelved indefinitely. Instead, he called a private meeting in a stone-walled room in the Vatican Secretariat of State, a chamber untouched for crises since the 2015 refugee surge. Only 7 were present: Leo, 2 Vatican gendarmes, an Interpol liaison officer, a priest with expertise in human trafficking, a Swiss guard officer, and Elias, his face pale, his hands still clutching Sophia's lavender butterfly clip. The Swiss guard commandant, a man of rigid duty, objected softly. "Your Holiness, this is a civil matter, a private case." Leo's hand rose, his voice calm but unyielding, like a father defending his own. "A child has been taken," he said, his eyes piercing the room. "We are not a church if we stand idle. No doctrine, no dogma, no decree asks us to turn away from a father whose heart bleeds because his child is gone. Mobilize everything Interpol, the Carabinieri, every diplomatic arm of the Holy See. Sophia Meyer will not be left behind." His words landed like a gavel, silencing doubt, igniting action. That night, the Vatican sprang to life in ways unseen for decades. Encrypted faxes whirred, secure calls buzzed across Europe, and the Holy See's quiet intelligence networks typically guarding churches in war-torn regions shifted focus to Rome's shadowy outskirts, border crossings, and black market hubs. The Vatican's diplomatic channels, used for treaties and peace talks, now carried a single mission: find a 7-year-old girl with a lavender butterfly clip in her hair. The urgency was palpable, a heartbeat pulsing through the ancient walls. On May 12th, at 4:14 a.m., a Vatican convoy slipped through the North Gate, its headlights dimmed. Inside were 2 Interpol trackers, a Vatican medic, and a priest fluent in Roma dialects, his rosary clutched tightly. A tip had pointed to a transient camp outside Pomezia, 40 minutes south of Rome. They scoured the area, their boots sinking into muddy earth, their flashlights slicing through fog. Families huddled in tents, their eyes wary. But the girl they found wasn't Sophia, just another lost soul, her face gaunt, her hair dark but unadorned. Elias, waiting in the Vatican barracks, still in his uniform, gripped the lavender clip, his fingers tracing its delicate wings. He hadn't slept, his eyes red-rimmed, his voice a broken prayer. "Bring her back, God. Please." On May 13th, hope flickered again. A grainy security feed from a Naples rail station showed a girl boarding a train, her hand gripped by a man in a black coat, a lavender butterfly clip catching the light. Vatican analysts, hunched over screens, enhanced the footage, pixel by pixel. Pope Leo stood behind them, his breath shallow, his hands clasped so tightly his knuckles whitened. "That's her," he whispered, his voice trembling with certainty. "That's Sophia." Plainclothes agents raced to Naples, coordinating with local police, their radios crackling with urgency. But the trail vanished. The man had switched trains, melting into the crowd, leaving no trace, no ticket, no name, no witnesses. Elias sat in the barracks, his head in his hands, the clip pressed to his forehead, his whispers barely audible. "Sophia, Piccola, I'm still here." Each dead end carved deeper into Elias's soul. He hadn't eaten. His uniform hung loose on his frame. At dawn and dusk, he stood by the chapel doors, his lips moving in silent pleas. "God, if you let me hold her again, I'll never ask for anything else." In his private quarters, Leo knelt barefoot on the stone floor, the wooden cross he'd given Elias 15 years ago pressed to his chest. "Father," he prayed, his voice breaking, "you parted seas, healed the blind, raised the dead. Let this father see his child. Don't let his heart break again." His tears fell unseen, a pope weeping for a guard, a friend, a father. By the night of May 13th, the Vatican was shrouded in a heavy quiet. Elias, no longer in uniform, paced St. Peter's Square, his boots scuffing the cobblestones, his face a mask of anguish. In the armory, he sat alone, staring at his reflection in a blackened bayonet, the lavender clip trembling in his hands. "Sophia, Piccola, come home," he whispered, his voice a lullaby laced with despair. But someone, somewhere, was listening. On May 14th, the third day, Pope Leo chose prayer over protocol. He didn't hide in his private chapel, but walked into St. Peter's Basilica at dusk, where the setting sun painted the ceilings gold, and shadows draped the marble saints like mourners. Word of a vigil had spread, not for politics or power, but for a little girl named Sophia. Pilgrims, guards, and staff filled the pews, their faces etched with hope and sorrow, their hands clutching rosaries or tissues. The air was thick with the scent of wax and incense, the candles flickering like stars in a storm. Leo approached the altar alone, his white cassock unadorned, his rosary dangling from his weathered hands. "Lord," he prayed, his voice a raw plea, "you said, 'Let the children come to me.' Now we beg you, send one back." His words trembled, a father's heart speaking through a pope's lips, and the basilica seemed to hold its breath, as if the stones themselves were praying. Then, a rustle at the great bronze doors, a sound so faint it might have been mist. Heads turned, a murmur rippling through the crowd. The doors creaked open, their weight groaning against the silence. A man entered ordinary, his jacket rough, his boots caked with mud, his hands gently guiding a girl by the shoulders. Her clothes were torn at the sleeves, her shoes mismatched, her hair a tangled mess, but a lavender butterfly clip gleamed in the candlelight, a beacon of hope. A gasp tore through the basilica, hearts stopping, breaths held. "Sophia," a voice whispered, soft but piercing. Elias, standing in the shadows of the left aisle, froze, his eyes locking on the girl. His heart knew before his mind could process, a father always knows. He ran, his boots pounding the marble, and dropped to his knees before her, his arms flung wide. Sophia stood, her eyes wide with confusion, her small frame trembling in the vastness of the basilica. For a heartbeat, she hesitated, her gaze searching his face. Then, with a cry that shattered the silence, she flew into his arms, her tiny hands clutching his neck, her sobs muffled against his chest. "Papa," she whimpered, her voice a lifeline, her body shaking as she clung to him. Elias's shoulders heaved, his tears soaking her hair, his voice a broken litany. "Sophia, piccola, sei tornata, you're home." The basilica was still, the crowd breathless, nuns weeping silently, pilgrims clasping hands. Pope Leo stepped down from the altar, his steps slow, his eyes glistening. He knelt beside them, his knees touching the cold marble, one hand resting on Elias's trembling back, the other gently brushing Sophia's head, her hair soft under his calloused fingers. "Grazie, Signore," he prayed aloud, his voice cracking with gratitude, "for returning the lamb to the fold, for reminding us no child is forgotten, not by their father, nor by you." The words hung in the air, a prayer answered, a miracle witnessed. The stranger, questioned by a Vatican officer, spoke with quiet simplicity. She was walking near Via Ardeatina, alone, no shoes, shivering in the dark. I saw her face on the news this morning. I thought, maybe this is why I left home today. He turned and slipped away, giving no name, his muddy boots leaving faint prints on the marble. The Vatican tried to trace him. No phone, no ID, no trace on surveillance. Some called him a kind stranger. Others whispered of angels. But no one doubted that at 6:47 p.m. on May 14, 2025, Sophia Meyer walked into St. Peter's Basilica by the hand of a man no one could name and fell into her father's arms, her lavender clip a silent testament to hope fulfilled. As the bells tolled for evening mass, St. Peter's Square erupted with joy, laughter, tears, and prayers mingling in the twilight. Pope Leo stood by the altar, his face radiant, and whispered to himself, "This was never just a search. It was a rescue led by God." By May 15th, the story spread not through headlines or press conferences, but through whispers in Vatican corridors, tearful messages among staff, and pilgrims retelling the miracle they'd witnessed. Leo didn't summon cameras or issue a statement. Instead, he sat on a simple wooden stool outside his quarters, overlooking the square where children played by the fountains, their laughter a balm to the soul. Sophia, her hair freshly braided by a kind nun, skipped nearby, her smile fragile but growing. Turning to Elias, who stood beside him, his eyes still red from tears, Leo spoke softly. "In Peru, you carried bricks from fallen homes. This week, you carried a father's silence, a weight heavier than stone. This church is not marble or pageantry. It's the sound of a father crying behind a uniform. The heartbeat of a child returned. He paused, his gaze drifting to the horizon, where Rome's lights began to twinkle. You stood beside me in the rubble, Elias. How could I not return that grace? A shepherd who won't leave the 99 for the one has never known God's heart. That evening, in a homily to a small circle of Vatican staff, Leo's voice was quiet but piercing, his words destined to echo for years. Leadership is not standing above the broken. It's kneeling beside them until they can rise. Faith is not a throne, it's a cross, carried for another. No grand gestures, no medals, just a truth that rippled through the square, touching hearts far beyond Rome. In 3 days, Pope Leo XIV had shown what it meant to be a brother, a servant, a friend, a pope who saw a father's tears and refused to look away. This story is more than a fleeting moment. It's a testament to what the Church is called to be, not a fortress of power, but a family of compassion. In Peru, 2 men dug through rubble to save lives, their hands bleeding, their hearts united. In Rome, one of them, now a pope, tore through bureaucracy to save a daughter, his heart bleeding with a father's pain. Leo XIV showed that faith is not a set of rules, it's a response to suffering, a willingness to kneel in the dust, to carry another's cross. For Elias, it was the cross of fear, a father's worst nightmare. For Sophia, it was the cross of being lost, alone in a world too big for her small frame. For Leo, it was the cross of leadership not ruling from above, but weeping from beside. The Church has faced storms before scandals, doubts, fading pews. But stories like this remind us why it endures. It's not the grandeur of St. Peter's or the weight of tradition. It's the quiet acts of love that echo louder than bells. A pope who remembers a face from a war zone, a guard who prays through his agony, a stranger who walks a child to safety. This is the Church at its core, not flawless, but faithful, not distant, but present, holding the broken until they can stand. As Elias stood at the Vatican gates that night, Sophia's hand warm in his, her lavender clip catching the moonlight, he watched Leo disappear into his chambers. He didn't salute or bow. He nodded, his eyes brimming, knowing this pope hadn't broken protocol. He had fulfilled a promise etched in dust and stone, a promise of a God who never forgets his children. If this story touched your heart, share it. Leave a comment and let us know where you're watching from. And remember, sometimes the path we're meant to walk is illuminated by acts of compassion that defy protocol.